The main character never truly belonged at school. It wasn't because he was bullied, he simply didn't have a single friend. Everyone always said the same things about him, that he was boring to be around, or that he was a weirdo who never smiled. Still, it didn't bother him that much because there was one place where he felt he belonged: the arcade. What drew him in the most were fighting games. Back then, arcades were filled with all kinds of people. Students, office workers stopping by after work, random old men whose backgrounds he could never guess, and more than anyone else, delinquents. Honestly, for a kid like Kairu Mitsushima, arcades weren't exactly the safest places. Kairu told the man at the machine that he was next and asked if he could stop hogging it. The man turned around angrily, but another person calmed him down, saying it was only a kid who would lose in no time anyway. Although the arcade wasn't the friendliest environment for Kairu, none of that mattered once the game began. It didn't matter if the opponent was older, a girl, or even a delinquent. Inside the arcade, only one thing mattered: the strongest player wins. As Kairu continued playing, more and more people gathered around his machine. Someone muttered in amazement that he had already won 50 matches in a row. Another person remarked that they had heard this kid was some kind of local legend. By the time Kairu had become practically unbeatable at his local arcade, he had begun to understand why he never fit in at school. Why couldn't he smile? It was probably because he had an unpleasant personality. Kairu loved only one thing: competition. He loved crushing his opponents. School, however, was a place where everyone was expected to get along. They had to be considerate toward teachers, classmates, and girls alike. Everyone constantly had to tiptoe around each other's feelings. Kairu found that exhausting. Fighting games were different. Nobody had to get along. Nobody even had to speak. All they had to do was sit down, insert a 100 yen coin, and regardless of age or social status, everyone became an opponent standing in his way. No other game suited him so perfectly. Eventually, after an incredible winning streak, Kairu finally lost. The defeat felt unbearable. On his way home, he thought that losing felt like hell, so the first thing he needed to do was review his strategy notebook. The moment he arrived home, he opened it and began studying. Over the following days, his routine never changed. He would go to the arcade, rack up a 13-win streak, return home to analyze every match in his notebook, then head back again. He studied deep into the night. The following day after class, he returned once more and achieved an incredible 99 consecutive victories. One afternoon, his homeroom teacher called him into the faculty office. She held up a notebook and asked him what it was. Kairu immediately realized his mistake. Because he had been so sleep-deprived, he had accidentally turned in his fighting game strategy notebook instead of his school assignment. Scratching his head awkwardly, he explained that it was simply a notebook filled with strategies for fighting games. His teacher looked confused. Fighting games? She wondered how they were any different from martial arts. Kairu explained that they weren't really the same, but admitted it would be difficult to explain. His teacher smiled and said that wasn't necessarily true. She enjoyed watching sports herself and genuinely wanted to understand. After hesitating for a moment, Kairu decided to explain. The easiest difference, he said, was the flashy special moves. Characters could fire energy blasts from their hands, dash forward while ignoring gravity, and perform all sorts of impossible techniques that could never exist in real life. His teacher laughed and compared it to firing a Kamehameha. Kairu admitted that it was exactly that kind of thing. Then his expression became more serious. Most beginners, he explained, focused on the spectacular attacks and long combos. But what truly separated fighting games from real martial arts was something else entirely. The players who realized that fact early were the ones who eventually became the strongest. Curious, his teacher asked what it was. Kairu crossed his arms in front of his face. Defense. In fighting games, defense was far stronger and far easier than in real life. That's why impossible situations happened all the time. Tiny girls could block attacks from enormous soldiers without suffering a scratch. There were no attacks that naturally broke a guard from the side. Even after being knocked to the ground, a character became temporarily invincible until standing back up again. His teacher commented that it sounded somewhat similar to boxing. But if defense was that powerful, wouldn't every match simply become a contest of blocking? Kairu's eyes lit up. That, he said, was an excellent question. It was exactly why every character possessed a move called a throw. His teacher quickly pieced it together. Throws defeated blocking. Blocking defeated attacks. Attacks defeated throws. Kairu leaned forward excitedly. Exactly. She had already understood the rock-paper-scissors system. He even praised her, saying she had real talent. Throws were the ultimate answer to a defensive opponent, which meant players had to keep each other away with attacks while constantly threatening throws. Before he could continue explaining the deeper mechanics, however, his teacher stopped him. She laughed and admitted she understood enough already. Instead, she wanted to ask something much simpler. What was the best part of fighting games for Kairu? Kairu paused. The best part? After thinking for a moment, he answered, anyone could win. As long as they made the right decision at exactly the right moment. anyone could defeat anyone else. His teacher glanced down at the strategy notebook in her hands. She quietly repeated his words. Anyone could win if they chose correctly at the right time. So that was why Kairu studied so hard. He nodded. If someone studied properly, they could defeat anyone, regardless of age, gender, or social status. His teacher smiled gently. That was something impossible to achieve at school. Kairu immediately agreed. In the world of fighting games, even his teacher could probably defeat the annoying vice principal. That made her burst into laughter. She admitted that it actually sounded wonderful. Then her expression gradually became more serious. But in the end, it was still only a game. No matter how much someone loved fighting games, and no matter how hard they worked, they wouldn't help them build a future. That was simply reality. Even sports only became careers for an incredibly small number of exceptional people. Games were even less realistic. Even if someone became the greatest player in the entire world, they still wouldn't be able to make a living from them. Kairu froze. He instinctively looked away. His teacher gently reminded him that he had been the one talking about making the right decisions at the right time. With high school entrance exams approaching next year, she wanted him to ask himself one question. What decision would allow him to win the much longer game called life? She believed someone as hardworking as Kairu would be able to find the answer. She also reminded him that his grades were already quite good. If he continued on this path and didn't make any mistakes, he would surely grow into someone remarkable. Kairu quietly repeated those words to himself. Someone remarkable. He said he would think about it before quietly leaving the office. As Kairu walked home, his teacher's words echoed endlessly in his mind. Everything she had said made perfect sense. If winning at life meant becoming a successful adult, then there was really only one path he could choose. But was that truly the only answer? He understood that the world wasn't kind enough to let people survive simply by doing what they loved. Still, maybe his passion was different from everyone else's. After all, who else played fighting games the way he did? Who else could keep winning like this? There wasn't anyone. Once again, Kairu achieved an incredible 99 consecutive victories. The crowd surrounding his arcade cabinet stared in disbelief. 99 wins in a row. Someone pointed out that he hadn't lost the previous day either. Another person estimated that his total winning streak had already exceeded 100 victories. As Kairu listened to the whispers around him, one question lingered in his mind. Was it really true that fighting games had no future? Suddenly, someone placed a hand on his shoulder. A man calmly told him that they needed to have a little talk outside. A bead of sweat rolled down Kairu's face. He quietly followed the group. He had already noticed something strange recently. Strong fighting game players from other regions had begun showing up at this arcade. They were invaders, and they were trouble. Once they reached a deserted spot outside, the man standing in the middle suddenly punched Kairu square in the face. His vision blurred. A man wearing a cap laughed. So the middle school brat started getting full of himself. Huh. The man who had thrown the punch sneered. You really thought you were good at the game. You don't know your place. Kairu wiped the blood from his mouth. Even so, he thought bitterly that he was still better than these guys. The man immediately grabbed him by the collar. You only win because of cheap tactics. Another punch slammed into his face. You rely on dirty tricks, then start acting like you're some hotshot. Kairu shot back that he wasn't the one acting arrogant. They were. The man grinned. Everyone says the same thing. They all know you only win because of gimmicks. They even gave you a nickname. Cheese Boy. The words echoed inside Kairu's head. Cheese Boy. The man with the cap laughed. We're doing the community a favor. Players like you ruin the game. Another man leaned close until their faces were almost touching. So disappear. And don't ever come back to this arcade. Kairu angrily demanded to know who they thought they were to tell him that. Before he could finish speaking, another punch struck him across the face. Shut up. And don't even think about fighting back. Otherwise you'll end up just like him. The man pointed behind them. Kairu turned his head. A boy lay unconscious on the ground, covered in bruises. The man casually explained that the boy had also been a toxic player. He had resisted. That was the result. Then he smirked. You know why arcades aren't for brats like you? Kairu demanded to know why. The man answered without hesitation. Because arcades are supposed to be places where everyone has fun together. Those words echoed through Kairu's mind. Everyone has fun together, the man continued. Selfish punks like you ruin everyone else's fun. Kairu silently clenched his fists. Being considerate. Thinking about everyone else. Those words sounded exactly like school. After several moments of silence, Kairu lowered his head. He quietly said that he understood. He wouldn't come back anymore. Satisfied, the man nodded. Good. At least you know how to listen. You can go home now. Kairu slowly stood up. He wiped the blood from his face one last time. Then he quietly walked away. Several days later, Kairu happened to pass by the arcade again. He stopped in front of the entrance. The words from that day replayed inside his head. Don't ever come back. His fist tightened. Just as he was about to leave, someone spoke behind him. You're not going in? Kairu turned around. It was the same boy who had been beaten unconscious. The boy asked whether he had really quit coming to the arcade. Kairu answered immediately. Of course. After what happened, he stopped mid-sentence. Then, almost shouting, he asked what the point of fighting games even was anymore. They weren't going to help anyone's future anyway. The other boy nodded. That's true. Kairu frowned. If that's true, then why are you still going there? The boy looked toward the arcade. I don't really know. He smiled faintly. I just feel like, if I run away from this place, I'll probably spend the rest of my life running away from everything. Kairu stared at him. A life spent running away? What does that even mean? Grinding his teeth, Kairu argued that it was only an arcade. Only a fighting game. How could something so small decide the course of someone's entire life? The boy quietly repeated his words. Just a fighting game. Then he nodded. Maybe. After taking a few steps toward the arcade, he stopped. If you've found somewhere else where you belong, maybe you should go there instead. Kairu gave a faint smirk. Somewhere else he belonged. Maybe that was exactly what he should do. He continued walking away. All this time, he had believed he was better than anyone else at making the correct decision at the correct moment. So this choice had to be right too. And someday, if he ever met that boy again, he would prove that he had made the right decision. 30 years passed. Kairu Mitsushima stood inside the company where he worked while his co-workers congratulated him. His boss proudly announced that Kairu had risen through the ranks faster than anyone else in the company's history. Everyone expected even greater success from him in the future. His boss also reminded him not to forget the dinner he had arranged with his daughter. Kairu smiled politely and accepted the invitation. From the day he walked away from the arcade, he never returned. He devoted every minute of his life to studying. He entered a prestigious high school, then a prestigious university. After graduation, he joined one of the country's top companies. From the very beginning, his career advanced smoothly. Meanwhile, arcades slowly disappeared. Fighting games declined until they had almost vanished completely. Kairu quietly smiled to himself. Yes, he had made the correct decision that day. He had won. Surely, even that boy would agree. One afternoon, while Kairu was smoking on the company rooftop, a young woman approached him. She called out to him. Kairu turned around and asked who she was. The woman introduced herself as Nizuna Shindo, explaining that she had joined the company earlier that year. She said there was something she desperately wanted to discuss with him. Kairu asked whether she shouldn't be speaking with one of her direct supervisors instead. Nizuna shook her head. She insisted that she had to talk to him personally and begged him to hear her out. After seeing how serious she was, Kairu agreed. The two of them sat down. After gathering her thoughts, Nizuna finally spoke. She said she was thinking about quitting the company. Kairu looked surprised. She had only been working there for 6 months. He asked if the workload was simply too overwhelming. Nizuna immediately shook her head. No, she actually loved the work itself. The real problem was something else. She couldn't fit into the company's culture. Kairu quietly repeated her words. The atmosphere. Nizuna nodded. She explained that she had joined because it was the job she had dreamed about ever since childhood. She poured everything she had into her work. But after she began giving it her all, the people around her started treating her differently. Some people said she cared too much. Others called her creepy. Some claimed she didn't understand teamwork. Others accused her of trying to climb the corporate ladder by herself. Again and again, people kept telling her to read the room. And every single time, they compared her to Kairu. Everyone praised Matsushima-san. They said he always smiled. He always understood the atmosphere. Most importantly, he always prioritized harmony within the team. Nizuna clenched her fists. She wanted to know something. How had Kairu managed to live that way and actually enjoy it? She wanted to hear the answer directly from him. Kairu remained silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly. I've never enjoyed it. Nizuna froze. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. But, you're always smiling. Kairu pointed at the smile on his own face. This smile. It's fake. Reading the room. Keeping everyone happy. Maintaining harmony. Those were simply parts of the job. The truth was, he hated every second of it. Nizuna stared at him. If that's true, why do you keep doing it? Kairu answered without hesitation. Because that's how you win the game. Nizuna looked confused. The game? Kairu explained. Their actual work skills weren't enough. To win inside a company, they had to carefully observe everyone's reactions. Praise their bosses. Smile at their subordinates. Always behave appropriately. Always say the correct thing. Always perform their duties flawlessly. That was the strategy. That was the winning strategy inside the company. Nizuna stared at him in disbelief. So you're saying, people should just endure it now, so they can eventually live the life they want later? Kairu quietly shook his head. No, it isn't temporary. This continues forever. Nizuna's expression collapsed. Forever. She whispered the word as if she couldn't accept it. That sounds unbearable. Kairu calmly replied. That's simply how life is. It's the ultimate strategy in this game. Nizuna lowered her head. There has to be another way. Kairu asked whether she felt disappointed. Then he apologized. Bluntly, he told her that the job she had dreamed about since childhood was nothing more than a terrible game. If she wanted to remain at the company, she would have to change herself. If she refused to change, then she should simply quit. Nizuna quietly asked whether he was truly telling her to give up on the dream she had pursued since she was a child. Kairu answered yes. Dreams didn't pay the bills. Nizuna stood there speechless. After a long silence, she bowed. She thanked him for listening. With a faint smile, she said his words had helped her make up her mind. Then she quietly walked away. Kairu watched her leave. Perhaps he had been too harsh, but it couldn't be helped. This was the life he had chosen. If he admitted that she was right, then everything he had sacrificed over the past 30 years would lose its meaning. Winning meant making the right decision at the right time. For Nizuna, perhaps leaving the company now really was the correct choice. The following morning, the entire office was in shock. Someone announced that a young employee from the company had taken her own life. Whispers spread throughout the office. One employee remembered that Nizuna had seemed troubled lately. Another admitted they had never imagined something like this would happen. Someone else mentioned that Nizuna had said she planned to talk to someone she trusted because she believed it would help ease her worries. Another person wondered what that person had said to her. Kairu stood frozen. His hand trembled. A horrifying thought crossed his mind. Was that person me? Had he made the wrong decision? After hearing the news, Kairu shut himself inside his apartment. He sat in front of his computer, without really knowing why. He searched for information about fighting games. Back in the 1990s, when he had still played, the genre had slowly declined. Arcades had closed one after another. Everyone believed fighting games had died. But then, everything changed. In the 2010s, the internet gave fighting games a second life. Now they were known around the world as esports. And standing at the center of that new era was one man. Kairu stared at the screen in disbelief. No, it couldn't be. He continued reading. The man's name was Daigo Umehara, champion of countless tournaments, still competing, a living legend among professional fighting game players. Kairu whispered to himself. There was no doubt. It was that boy, the same boy he had met outside the arcade 30 years earlier. He immediately opened an interview featuring Daigo. The interviewer mentioned that fighting games had gone through many difficult years and asked whether there had ever been moments when continuing felt impossible. Daigo smiled. There absolutely had. Even for him, there had been times when continuing was painful. Many incredibly talented players had quit along the way. The interviewer asked whether he believed any of them could have become professionals if they had continued. Daigo answered without hesitation. Yes, there was one. Cheese Boy. The nickname struck Kairu like lightning. Another interviewer laughed. The guy from that local arcade? Daigo nodded. The interviewer remarked that Cheese Boy had been famous for relying on cheap tactics. Daigo immediately shook his head. It wasn't cheese. It was strategy. Back then, almost nobody took fighting games seriously. To casual players, precise strategy looked like dirty tricks. But it wasn't. That player loved fighting games more than anyone. He sacrificed everything for them. He genuinely aimed to become the best. Daigo even revealed that he had traveled specifically to challenge him. The interviewer reacted in amazement. Daigo continued. But after some meaningless harassment, that player disappeared. If he had kept playing, Daigo believed with absolute certainty he would have become a professional. Kairu's vision blurred. Tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. Tears streamed endlessly down Kairu's face. The fighting games he had abandoned 30 years ago, he had truly loved them. He had sacrificed his sleep night after night, refining strategies, studying every matchup, and searching for the perfect decisions. Yet people mocked him. They called his playstyle cheese. They said he was ruining everyone's fun. Little by little, he began believing that everything he had worked so hard for was meaningless. But there had been someone who understood him all along, and that person had gone on to become the best player in the world. At that moment, Kairu finally understood. What he had done to Nizuna was no different from what those delinquents had done to him all those years ago. They had crushed his spirit with their fists. He had crushed Nizuna's spirit with his words. Both of them had destroyed someone simply to protect their own fragile pride. Staring at Daigo's face on the monitor, Kairu quietly whispered, "If Nizuna had spoken to you instead of me, would she still be alive?" Unable to hold back his emotions any longer, he broke down in tears. A few months later, Kairu submitted his resignation letter. His boss sighed. He told Kairu that he had heard Nizuna had struggled to fit in with the team. She had simply been different from everyone else. He assured Kairu that he wasn't entirely responsible for what had happened. Kairu gently shook his head. That's exactly why. The people who are different, they're the ones I should never have abandoned. And from now on, I don't want to make the wrong choice ever again. With those words, he quietly left the company. There was a peaceful smile on his face. Most people would probably laugh at his decision, but that no longer mattered. This time, He was going to walk the path he had chosen for himself, even if that path ended with him dying broke. At least he would never blame anyone else for how his life turned out. Eventually, Kairu stood in front of the same arcade he had abandoned 3 decades earlier. He gazed quietly at its entrance. Then he smiled. I'm home. Taking a deep breath, he made up his mind. I'm going to meet someone stronger than me. And this time, I'll stand before Daigo Omihara as a fellow professional. He stepped forward. At that exact moment, a truck came speeding toward him. Someone nearby screamed for him to watch out. But it was already too late. The truck slammed into him. Kairu Mitsushima died at the age of 44. As consciousness slowly faded away, one final thought crossed his mind. Perhaps this was punishment. Punishment for letting Mizuna die, then chasing after a new dream as though nothing had happened. If there really was another life, if he were ever given another chance, he wanted to make a choice he would never regret. Then, Kairu opened his eyes. He frowned. Something felt wrong. This wasn't the road in front of the arcade. He slowly looked around. A dense forest surrounded him. It was nighttime. Confused, he muttered to himself. What happened? I was hit by a truck. So why am I in a forest? Then he looked up. His eyes widened. There were 2 moons. For a long moment, Kairu simply stared at the sky. This wasn't the world he knew. No way. Did I get reincarnated into another world? Dead at the age of 44, Kairu Mitsushima had died while chasing his dream of becoming a professional fighting game player. As his consciousness faded, he couldn't help but wonder whether this was punishment for letting that girl die, or if some greater force had guided him toward this fate. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in his own world. Kairu stared in disbelief. He had really been reincarnated. Before he could gather his thoughts, someone suddenly shouted in alarm. There's another one over here. Within seconds, several unfamiliar men surrounded him. Remaining calm, Kairu carefully observed them. There was no doubt about it. This really was another world. One of the men stepped forward. Don't resist. Hearing those words, Kairu wondered if they already knew he wasn't originally from this world. The man pointed his sword at him. If you resist, we'll kill you where you stand. Kairu slowly raised both hands. I won't resist. Right now, he had no other choice. The soldiers forced him to follow them. As they walked, Kairu let out a small sigh of relief. At least they could understand each other's language. That meant he still had a chance to gather information. He asked where they were taking him. The soldiers stopped walking. We're already here. We'll explain everything once everyone is gathered. Everyone? Confused, Kairu looked ahead. His eyes widened. Standing before him were dozens of other people. They were all clearly from Earth. Although they appeared to be from different countries, they all shared the same confused expressions. Without warning, someone kicked Kairu to the ground. The soldier who kicked him reported to his captain. This is the last one. The captain stepped forward with a grin. Now then, it's time for your explanation. He looked over the crowd. Listen carefully, otherworlders. Every single one of them had already died in their previous world. After death, they had been summoned and reincarnated into this one. In other words, they had all been given a second chance at life. Kairu's heart skipped a beat. A second life. A fresh start. The captain continued. All of this was possible thanks to the king of this nation. Therefore, they would now serve as this country's fighters in battles against representatives from other kingdoms. The word fighters immediately caught Kairu's attention. One man shouted, "What the hell is a fighter?" The captain calmly explained. Fighters were what they called reincarnated people like them. Competitors who used the knowledge and skills from their previous world to engage in one-on-one combat. These battles had become incredibly popular. Soon, every nation would choose its strongest fighter to compete in the World Martial Tournament. One man smirked. So we're basically candidates to represent the country? You could say we're VIPs. He stepped closer to the captain. If that's the case, shouldn't you be treating us a little better? The next instant, his head flew off. His body collapsed to the ground. Kairu froze. The captain slowly wiped the blood from his sword. Don't misunderstand. Yes, you'll compete in tournaments. But those tournaments are nothing more than entertainment. The royal family and the nobility watch you while eating dinner. You are nothing more than spectacles. The other reincarnated people erupted into screams. The captain remained expressionless. You are replaceable. The rebellious. The stupid. The weak. We'll dispose of all of you immediately. Remember that. Cold sweat rolled down Kairu's back. His second chance at life had brought him here. The captain looked over the group. There are too many of you this time. His fellow knights laughed. There were plenty last time too. Maybe it's time to thin the herd. Kairu clenched his fists. These bastards, they really viewed human lives as toys. One knight grabbed a terrified woman. The captain smiled. The women can stay. We'll gladly welcome as many of them as possible. But if we're reducing numbers, it'll be the men. He slowly drew his sword. Now then, who should we get rid of first? Kairu's heartbeat accelerated. If they singled him out, he would die. Then the captain suddenly announced, "Pair up." The crowd looked confused. "Pair up? What are you planning? You'll find out soon enough." One knight barked at them to stop complaining and obey. Kairu immediately realized something. This was a life-or-death decision. If they intended to eliminate half the men, then whoever he chose to pair with would determine whether he lived or died. He quickly scanned the crowd. There was a serious-looking man, a hot-headed man, a mysterious-looking man. Who should he choose? He forced himself to think. The right decision, at the right time, that had always been his greatest strength. Just then, a voice called out to him. "Are you Japanese?" Kairu nodded. The man smiled. "Let's team up." Kairu looked him over. He seemed friendly, but he was enormous. Without question, the largest man among everyone gathered there. Kairu asked why he wanted to partner with him. The giant scratched his head. "I think I figured out what's about to happen. They're looking for strong fighters, and they said we would use our knowledge and skills." Kairu remembered the captain saying exactly that. The giant continued, "I'm confident in my skills, but not my brains. So, I figured I'd team up with the guy who looks the smartest." Kairu blinked. Did he really look like the smartest person here? The giant smiled warmly. "I like Japanese people. They're loyal. They're kind. I know you won't betray me." Kairu considered it. Knowledge, combined with strength. It really did seem like a solid strategy. Around them, everyone else was already forming pairs. He couldn't hesitate any longer. Trusting his instincts, Kairu reached out his hand. "I'll team up with you." The giant happily shook it. "You saved me." Kairu smiled slightly. Maybe he had made the right decision. After everyone had formed pairs, the captain looked over the group. "Finished?" Kairu glanced around confidently. His team had both intelligence and strength. No matter what kind of challenge awaited them, this combination should give them the greatest chance of winning. Then the captain smiled. "Good. Now, fight your partner." Kairu froze. For a moment, he couldn't process what he had just heard. The captain continued without emotion. "The winners will be taken to the capital as fighter candidates. The losers will be executed on the spot." Kairu's eyes widened. Fight? Their own partner? It was the complete opposite of what they had expected. He hurriedly turned toward the giant beside him. "What do we do? If we fight, one of us is going to die." His prediction had been completely wrong. The giant suddenly smiled. But it wasn't the friendly smile Kairu had seen before. It was cruel. "No, your prediction was actually right." He laughed quietly. "These people treat our lives like trash. So naturally. The fastest way to cut our numbers in half is to make every pair fight." I knew that from the very beginning. Kairu stared at him in disbelief. The giant looked directly into his eyes. "That's exactly why I picked you. The weakest looking, the most cowardly, old Japanese man here." Kairu couldn't say a word. The captain asked who wanted to fight first. The giant immediately raised his hand. "I'll go." Kairu felt a chill run through his body. "Oh, what exactly was this man?" The captain nodded. "Begin." The giant removed his coat. The muscles beneath it stunned everyone present. His body looked more like a monster than a human being. The soldiers shouted impatiently. "Come on, fight. Show some guts, old man." The captain lowered his hand. The match began. Kairu remained frozen. How was he supposed to fight someone like this? He was an average middle-aged man. His opponent outweighed him by an enormous margin. If he lost, he would die. Looking at it logically, there was absolutely no way he could win. The giant's fist suddenly slammed into Kairu's face. He was sent flying across the ground. The giant grinned. Still alive. Not bad for an old man. Kairu wiped the blood from his mouth. The damage was surprisingly light. Maybe he could actually withstand a few hits. But that didn't matter. If he kept taking punches without fighting back, he would eventually die. His only chance was speed. He would keep running until the giant became exhausted. The giant charged again. Then how about this? His massive fist swung toward Kairu's body. Kairu focused. The swing was much larger than before. He could dodge this. Move to the side. Counterattack. The next instant, the fist smashed into his chin. Kairu crashed to the ground again. His eyes widened. He had failed to dodge. The punch landed perfectly. These attacks were unbelievably powerful. But something bothered him even more. Why? Couldn't he move sideways? The giant laughed. Lying down. That's dangerous. He stomped hard onto Kairu's chest. Pain shot through his body. The giant laughed even harder. I got lucky pairing up with trash like you, and getting reincarnated into this world. I thought my life ended inside prison. But look at me now. What an incredible second chance. Kairu froze. Prison? He looked up. Wait. Don't tell me. You're a convict? The giant laughed proudly. That's right. A criminal. To be exact, I murdered 3 children and 2 women. I was on death row. Kairu's blood ran cold. This man, had been executed in his previous world. He wasn't simply violent. He was a genuine monster. The giant repeatedly stomped on Kyra's chest. I'm garbage. A real piece of trash. I love making weak people suffer. That's why I can recognize weaklings so easily. He laughed. Japanese people? Loyal. Kind. They're just spineless cowards too scared to fight. Turning toward the soldiers, he shouted proudly, See, this is how this world works. Beat your opponent senseless and climb your way to the top. The soldiers cheered. Hell yeah, this world's the best. Meanwhile, Cairo closed his eyes. What an idiot. He had promised himself never to make the wrong choice again. Yet just like 30 years ago, he had allowed another scumbag's words to deceive him. He had made another fatal mistake. Cairo slowly clenched his fists. If that was the case, then this time, he would do what he couldn't do before. Even if he couldn't win, he would at least land one punch. The spectators watched quietly. The giant looked toward the captain. It's over. One soldier nodded. Looks that way. Another yawned. This match was boring. The difference in strength is way too obvious. The captain began calling for the next pair. Then, he suddenly frowned. Wait. The giant looked confused. What? The captain narrowed his eyes. Why did you stop fighting? The giant blinked. What do you mean? The old man's aura. Before he could finish, a fist slammed into his face. Cairo had gotten back up. The soldiers gasped. The old man attacked. Get him. The giant stumbled backward. What? Why are you still alive? Cairo wiped the blood from his lips. Then he smiled. Who knows? What do you think? As he replayed everything that had happened, something finally clicked. After taking all those attacks, he had barely been injured. While lying on the ground, the giant hadn't been able to damage him further. He also couldn't sidestep attacks properly. Most importantly, his ordinary punch had actually hurt someone far heavier than himself. A possibility formed inside his mind. He looked directly at the giant. Hey, I've got a request. The giant frowned. What? Hit me. With everything you've got. The crowd stared at him. What is that old man talking about? Did he lose his mind? The giant laughed. My full power? So all those punches until now, you think I was holding back? Cairo smiled. No way. That wasn't your strongest attack. Inside his mind, he thought, now, I'll prove my theory. The giant clenched his fist and grinned viciously. Fine. You want my full power? Then get ready. I'll give you everything I've got. This time, Cairo didn't move. He wasn't going to dodge. He raised both arms in front of his face. He would block. The giant's full-powered punch crashed into Cairo's guard. The impact echoed across the field. The giant smirked. How's that, old man? But Cairo remained standing, without a scratch. He smiled. Piece of cake. At that moment, everything became clear. Back in his original world, there was no way someone with his build could have blocked a punch from a monster like this. The difference in size alone would have blown him away. That meant only one thing. This world didn't follow the rules of reality. It followed a completely different rule set. The giant roared in anger and attacked again. Don't screw with me. I'll snap those skinny little arms clean off. Cairo calmly continued thinking. If his theory was correct, then this world's combat system worked exactly like. A memory suddenly flashed through his mind. His high school teacher smiled as she asked him, So how are fighting games different from real martial arts? He remembered his answer perfectly. The biggest difference is defense. There aren't attacks that naturally break your guard from the side. And once someone is knocked down, you can't keep attacking them. Defense in fighting games was far easier and far stronger than in real life. He remembered another question she had asked. If defense is that powerful, wouldn't every match become nothing but blocking? He had smiled back then. That's why. Every character has throws. The instant that memory ended, Cairo moved. He grabbed the giant. Using perfect timing, he executed a throw. The enormous man crashed violently onto the ground. Everyone watching froze. One of the soldiers gasped. That looked like a top-class fighter's technique. Even the captain's lips curled into a smile. Cairo finally understood. Without a doubt, this world functioned exactly like the thing he had loved more than anything else. The thing he had abandoned. The dream he had never been able to chase. This world operated under the same rules as a fighting game. His eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming joy. The giant slowly stood up. He glared at Cairo. Don't get cocky. You only landed one throw. An old yellow monkey like you could never beat me. Cairo nodded. You're right. In our old world, no matter how rotten someone like you was, a powerless man like me never would have stood a chance. He slowly stepped forward. But this isn't our old world. In this place, age doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Status doesn't matter. Not even nationality matters. He smiled confidently. The winner is the one who makes the right decision. At the right time, Cairo rushed forward. You know, I really got lucky. The giant frowned. Lucky. Being paired with trash like you. As he closed the distance, Kairu calmly analyzed every movement. Quick jabs. Force him backward. Pressure him. Control the pace. The giant swung wildly. Kairu avoided every opening with precise timing. Even while attacking, he couldn't help but think about what the giant had said earlier. Japanese people were supposed to be kind, supposed to value teamwork? He laughed. Some Japanese just love fighting way too much. The giant stumbled backward. Kairu immediately advanced. In fighting games, once an opponent was knocked down, you pressured them before they could recover. He jumped forward. Another clean hit landed. The giant staggered. Kairu smiled. Then came the confirmed hit. There was no escape now. Combo. His fists connected one after another with perfect rhythm. Every strike flowed naturally into the next. The giant couldn't recover. The spectators stared in disbelief. Kairu delivered one final uppercut straight into the giant's chin. Remember this. There are scumbags like me among Japanese people too. Full combo. The final blow launched the giant into the air. He crashed heavily onto the ground. Unconscious. Silence filled the battlefield. The old man won. The soldiers erupted in shock. Kairu threw both fists into the air. This world is awesome. The captain slowly approached him. What is your name? Kairu straightened himself. Kairu Mitsushima. The captain nodded. Fighter Kairu. Welcome. At that moment, Kairu finally understood something. His life hadn't ended. It had only just begun. In a world governed by the very same rules as the game he had loved most, he would become the strongest fighter in this incredible and terrifying fighting game isekai. Later, Kairu and the surviving reincarnated fighters were escorted to the royal palace. Inside the audience chamber, a woman sat upon the throne. She introduced herself. I am Kyla Chaos, king of the Bizion kingdom. She looked down upon them proudly. In my kingdom, strength is justice. The weak have no human rights. Kairu listened carefully. Strength is justice. Those words reminded him of the arcades from his youth. The king gestured toward someone nearby. Look carefully. This is what becomes of the weak. The message was simple. In this world, it was kill or be killed. Sympathy had no value. The other reincarnated people trembled in horror. But Kairu's eyes suddenly widened. Among those standing where the king had pointed, he recognized a familiar face. His breathing stopped. No way. Shinden Azuna? As Kairu turned toward the place the king had pointed out, he froze in shock after recognizing the figure before him. It was Shinden Azuna. His mind raced in disbelief as he wondered if she had also been reincarnated into this world. He knew he had to save her, but acting recklessly would make every soldier his enemy. He desperately searched for another option. If he tried to save her and succeeded, everything might work out, but if he failed, it would not only cost him his life, it could also get her killed. On the other hand, if he abandoned her, she would undoubtedly suffer horribly, but she would probably survive, while he would escape unharmed. No matter how he looked at it, abandoning her was the wiser choice. He convinced himself that, for her own sake, he should leave her behind. Nearby, a soldier carried a glowing piece of heated metal, grinning cruelly as he urged Nizuna to scream again like she had the previous night. Tears streamed down her face as she desperately begged for help. Without warning, Kairu charged forward and slammed his fist into the soldier's stomach. Another soldier immediately stepped in front of him, while a second rushed over to check on the injured man. Startled by the sudden commotion, Nizuna lifted her head and stared in surprise after recognizing him. It was manager Mitsushima. Kairu bitterly questioned himself. Hadn't he just decided to abandon her for her own good? He had already made that choice once before, and it had led to her death. Clenching his fist, he realized that repeating the same mistake again would truly make him hopeless, even as a fighting game player. Nizuna hesitantly confirmed whether he was really the manager, and Kairu assured her that it was indeed him. He told her not to worry, because this time he had made a different decision. This time, he would not abandon her. His declaration left Nizuna stunned. The captain asked the king whether they should deal with Kairu, but the king ordered everyone to wait and simply observe. Meanwhile, Kairu forced himself to think of a way to protect Nizuna. This was a fighting game world, yet the soldiers' swords functioned like instant kill attacks. Once a sword was drawn, death was almost certain. Under those conditions, the best option available to him was a sweep kick. Without hesitation, Kairu swept one soldier off his feet, spun around, and knocked down another before striking a third from behind. Sweep kicks were among the most basic techniques found in nearly every fighting game. They were one of the easiest ways to knock an opponent down. Normally, players could not attack a fallen opponent, and someone who had been knocked down could not retaliate until they got back up. In other words, if he kept landing sweep kicks every time they stood, he could win without giving them a chance to fight back. Against opponents who lacked defensive knowledge, repeated sweep kicks could completely lock them down. Watching the battle, the king's eyes sparkled with amusement. The other summoned people erupted in cheers, amazed by Kairu's incredible movements. Kyra thought that everything had gone exactly as expected. The ordinary soldiers who had watched his earlier fight with the large man were obviously surprised. The techniques he had shown before were only the most basic fighting game fundamentals. If those simple moves shocked them, then these soldiers were even less experienced than complete beginners. Suddenly, an invisible force slammed into him from behind. Kyra quickly turned, searching for the source. There was no one behind him, yet he had clearly felt the impact of a shockwave. Moments later, he realized the attack had come from the captain. A confident smile spread across the captain's face as another invisible projectile flew toward Kairu. Crossing both arms in front of his face, Kairu successfully blocked the attack. He immediately understood. Since this was a fighting game world, it was only natural that characters like the captain existed. The captain belonged to the projectile archetype. Projectile characters were fighters who specialized in launching ranged attacks. Much like those who used techniques similar to Hadouken, they relied heavily on fighting game fundamentals. Mastering such characters required considerable practice and experience, but once perfected, they possessed the potential to become top-level competitors. Kairu smiled to himself. That captain was clearly a projectile-type character. Coincidentally, Daigo Omihara, the greatest fighting game player in the world, also specialized in projectile characters. A question crossed his mind. Had the captain already reached the highest level, or was he still developing his skills? Regardless of the answer, Kairu realized he was currently at a severe disadvantage. He still had no idea what kind of character archetype he himself belonged to. Did he even possess special moves? If the technique he had used earlier counted as one, could he activate it whenever he wanted? The captain admitted that he was disappointed in Kairu because he had expected much more from him. Kairu silently cursed. At that moment, the king interrupted by addressing the otherworldly boy and asking for his name. Kairu introduced himself with his full name. The king remarked that he appeared quite strong and admitted that she liked strong men. She then instructed Captain Rakuto to allow Kairu to live. Captain Rakuto respectfully accepted her order. The king declared that she had high expectations for Kairu and wanted him to become the nation's representative fighter. Kairu accepted the order. Hearing this, Nizuna finally relaxed with relief, grateful that they had both survived. Kairu immediately moved toward her to remove the chains restraining her. However, the king suddenly questioned what he thought he was doing. She reminded him that she had never given permission for the woman to be released. She explained that although she admired strength and had forgiven Kairu because he was strong, Nizuna was weak, and she despised weak people. The king ordered the punishment to continue. Kairu immediately shouted for everyone to stop and demanded that they not touch Nizuna. As he stepped forward, a sharp blade was suddenly pressed against his neck. One of the soldiers mocked him for becoming too arrogant. Kairu cursed internally. During their conversation, the soldier had quietly drawn his sword. Nearby, another soldier approached Nizuna while carrying the heated metal, instructing her to scream properly this time. Nizuna stared in horror. Kairu desperately forced himself to think. At this rate, he would lose her all over again. As Nizuna cried out for help, inspiration suddenly struck him. He quickly announced that he had a proposal for the king. The king permitted him to speak. Kairu reminded her that she hated weakness and loved strength. If that was true, then wouldn't it be far more entertaining to witness a weak person become strong? He asked her to give him 1 week, promising that he would turn Nizuna into a warrior stronger than Captain Rakuto himself. The king burst into laughter. She declared that Captain Rakuto was the strongest fighter in the entire nation, making such a claim completely impossible. Kairu remained completely confident. Privately, he believed he could accomplish it if given enough time. The king then asked what he would offer if he failed. Kairu declared that if he failed, he would spend the rest of his life as the king's slave. Nizuna stiffened with anxiety. Laughing again, the king teased him before wondering whether he was simply overconfident or merely a pervert. She remarked that Kairu truly was a strange man. Then, with an amused smile, she admitted that the proposal interested her. If he could truly accomplish such a feat, she wanted to witness it herself. Relief appeared on Kairu's face. He thanked the king and requested Nizuna's release. He silently thanked fate, believing he had narrowly succeeded and finally made the correct decision. The king calmly informed him that he had misunderstood one very important thing. Confused, Kairu wondered what she meant. The king explained that while she certainly hated the weak and loved the strong, there was something she enjoyed even more than either of those. Above all else, she loved tormenting and humiliating the weak. Immediately afterward, she ordered the soldiers to continue. Kairu's entire body tensed in disbelief. In the next instant, the glowing piece of metal was pressed against Nizuna's skin. Her agonized scream echoed throughout the hall. Kairu desperately shouted for them to stop. Tears poured down Nizuna's face as her cries filled the room, while the other summoned people watched in horror. Kairu clenched his teeth in helpless fury. Eventually, the branding ended. The heated metal was lifted away, leaving behind a painful burn mark. Mizuna's eyes became completely lifeless. The king laughed with delight, declaring the spectacle wonderful before ordering her subjects to clean everything up. Grinding his teeth in rage, Kairu silently swore that he would never forgive King Bizion. Later that night, inside the fighter trainee dormitory, Kairu gently laid the unconscious Mizuna onto a bed. He realized that things could not continue this way. He needed to become the strongest fighter in this fighting game world. However, strength alone would never be enough. If he truly wanted to protect Mizuna from ever suffering like this again, he had to find the fastest possible path to overwhelming power. To achieve that, he first needed to understand his enemies while also discovering the true nature of his own abilities. Determined, Kairu decided to create a new strategy book, believing it would become his greatest lifeline. Since he had no idea who his future enemies might be, he knew that both his training methods and every strategy he developed had to remain completely secret. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Wondering who could possibly be visiting so late at night, Kairu went to answer it. Outside stood 3 girls, the same girls who had been summoned into this world alongside him. One of them explained that she had come so late because he was the only person they could rely on, and they desperately wanted him to teach them how to fight in this unfamiliar world. The 3 girls pleaded with Kairu to teach them how to fight in this unfamiliar world. Kairu asked why they had chosen him. One of the girls explained that he was strong and seemed trustworthy. He had defeated the giant man, and he had even claimed he could make that girl stronger within a single week. Because of that, they believed he could make them strong as well. Without hesitation, Kairu refused. Caught off guard by his immediate rejection, one of the girls demanded to know why. Kairu calmly asked why they assumed he would help them in the first place. She answered that he had risked everything to protect that woman. Seeing that, she believed he was the kind of person who could never ignore those who were weak. Kairu nodded in understanding before telling them they were mistaken. He described himself as a cold-hearted man who did not care about strangers. The only reason he had protected Mizuna Shindu was because she was someone special to him. The girls stared at him in disbelief, bitterly concluding that since they were not special to him, they could simply die without him caring. Another girl angrily called him an asshole and demanded to know whether he understood what kind of fate awaited girls who could not fight in this world. With a faint smirk, Kairu replied that it was none of his concern. The girl was left speechless. Another girl, addressing her companion as Kyoko, suggested that they simply leave. The third girl agreed, saying that Kairu was no different from every other man. Having lost all hope, the 3 girls turned around and walked away. After the door closed behind them, Mizuna quietly asked whether that had really been the right decision. Kairu sat beside her bed and asked whether she was disappointed in him again. He admitted that it could not be helped. In a place like this, there was no way to know who might betray them. Mizuna pointed out that they were only girls and wondered whether teaching them a few techniques would really have caused any harm. Kairu instead asked her what she believed was the most important factor for becoming stronger in this fighting game world. After a brief pause, he corrected himself and repeated the question. Mizuna thought for a moment before guessing that it must be something physical, such as strength or quick reflexes. Kairu shook his head. The most important thing, he explained, was knowledge. In this world, the gap in knowledge directly became a gap in strength. In a new fighting game, lacking the proper information could result in complete defeat simply because the opponent repeatedly used techniques that were difficult to counter. If they carelessly shared valuable knowledge with outsiders, those same people could eventually become dangerous enemies by developing unpredictable strategies. Fighting games, Kairu concluded, were battles of information just as much as they were battles of skill. Mizuna quietly repeated his words, realizing that she herself could also become stronger by obtaining that knowledge. Kairu confirmed her realization. Although the king had rejected his proposal, he intended to keep his promise no matter how long it took. He wanted Mizuna to become stronger than anyone else because he believed that was the only way he could atone for his past mistakes. Hearing those words, Mizuna silently imagined herself becoming stronger than everyone else. The following day, a soldier gathered all of the new recruits at the beginner's training area known as the Iron Gate. He instructed everyone to change into the fighter uniforms that had been prepared for them, while the girls were directed toward a separate set of clothing. Everyone quickly changed. Almost immediately, laughter and snickering spread throughout the area. Curious, Kairu looked toward the disturbance and saw the girls wearing their assigned outfits. Their faces burned bright red with embarrassment as they desperately tried to cover themselves. Someone shouted for everyone to stop staring, while others loudly complained about how strange the uniforms looked. The soldier silenced everyone before announcing that the vice captain would explain the rules of the Iron Gate. Kairu immediately focused his attention. He realized that anyone who failed to understand these rules would not survive. The vice captain explained that every newcomer would receive 2 credit coins. Each credit represented 1 week of life. As long as they spent 1 coin each week, they would be provided with food, clothing, and shelter for that period. One of the recruits nervously asked whether that meant the coins would be completely gone after 2 weeks. The vice captain confirmed that they would. Therefore, before those 2 weeks passed, everyone would have to steal credit coins from others. The only method of doing so was through official duels between warriors. As long as both sides agreed to fight, the duel would be recognized, and the victor would take 1 credit coin from the loser. Those were the rules of the Iron Gate. Kairu silently observed that every person's life was effectively worth only 2 credits. The situation reminded him of his old arcade days, when he would carefully spend the 200 yen he had saved by skipping drinks while chasing the excitement of endless winning streaks. The major difference now was that losing both credits meant they might actually die. That meant he needed to be even more cautious than he had ever been back then. If this place truly resembled the arcades, he already knew what would happen next. Right on cue, one man approached another newcomer and invited him to a duel. The newcomer suspiciously asked who he was. The challenger casually explained that he was also a beginner who had only arrived 3 months earlier. Kairu immediately recognized the situation. These people had no pride or desire to improve. Their only goal was to steal credits from newcomers. They were beginner hunters. Although they were technically beginners themselves, even a small amount of experience created an overwhelming advantage in fighting games where information determined victory. Fortunately, unlike the arcades, duels required mutual consent. As long as newcomers refused to be provoked, beginner hunters could accomplish nothing. The newcomer immediately declined the challenge. Kairu silently approved of the decision. After only a week of proper training, newcomers would already be capable of defeating low-level opponents like them. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed across the training grounds. Kairu turned toward the source of the commotion. 3 girls were surrounded by several men whose expressions made their intentions obvious. Kairu thought that it was inevitable. 3 young women who clearly did not belong in such a place would naturally attract unwanted attention. Kyoko ordered the men to stop and warned them not to come any closer. One of the men deliberately stepped forward and casually placed his hand on one of the girls while pretending it had been an accident. The girl's eyes widened in horror. The other 2 girls immediately rushed over to her. Furious, Kyoko confronted the man. With a mocking smile, the man suggested that if she truly had a problem with him, she should settle it through a duel. Kairu silently urged her to endure it. That was exactly how people like him operated. Contrary to Kairu's expectations, however, Kyoko accepted the challenge. The man's smile widened as he immediately agreed to the duel. Kairu stared in disbelief. He inwardly called her an idiot, wondering why she had been unable to simply endure the humiliation. One of the girls anxiously called out to Kyoko. Kyoko confidently reassured Miku that everything would be fine because she had practiced karate before. However, when the duel ended, Kyoko lay collapsed on the ground, completely defeated. Kyoko collapsed onto the ground in complete defeat. She could not believe she had lost. She had trained in karate, so even against a man, she had expected to put up some kind of fight. Instead, she had been completely helpless. The man laughed and casually announced that he would now be taking her credit coin. Kyoko replayed the match in her mind. At the beginning of the duel, she had planned to observe her opponent's movements before making her own attack. Instead, the man had done something she never expected. He had jumped high into the air and driven a powerful punch directly into her face. Realizing she had been caught off guard, Kyoko decided she simply needed to defend better the next time. However, her opponent repeated the exact same attack. Although she tried to guard against it, she could not understand why he kept jumping and attacking over and over again. That was the only thing he did, yet he controlled the entire match from beginning to end. The other girls immediately rushed over to help Kyoko. She admitted in frustration that she had been unable to do anything. At this rate, they would all become nothing more than prey for the men around them. Just as she feared, that day marked the beginning of their personal nightmare. The men who recognized their weakness became increasingly bold with each passing day, constantly provoking and harassing them. The abuse was painful, but even more painful was the fact that not a single person came to help them. Watching everything from a distance, Kyra noticed that more and more of those men appeared every day. Most of them had never fought themselves, yet they looked down on anyone who lost. He hated people like that more than anything. If he had taught Kyoko how to fight, she would never have lost to those beginner hunters. Even so, he forced himself to accept reality. This world revolved around the survival of the fittest. Simply staying alive was already fortunate. For now, he needed to focus only on becoming stronger himself. After all, that was exactly what he had always believed. He had become strong entirely on his own. Time passed. Eventually, the day arrived when Kyoko ran out of credit coins. One of the men grabbed her by the hair and mockingly asked what she intended to do now. Would she challenge him again? Or perhaps one of her friends wanted to fight in her place? When the girls hesitated, The man sneered at Kyoko, sarcastically asking whether those people could really be called her friends. The surrounding men burst into laughter. Kaoru silently told himself that their decision was the correct one. In this world, putting one's own survival first was unavoidable. The man turned back to Kyoko and suggested that if she fulfilled one of his personal wishes, he might generously share a few credit coins with her. He ordered her to come to his room immediately. With a vulgar grin, he added that unlike during a duel, he was gentle in bed. Kairu's anger instantly flared. He wondered whether the situation was also something that simply had to be accepted. Should everyone just feel grateful that they were not being killed? Closing his eyes, he struggled with his own thoughts. Suddenly, Mika stepped forward and declared that she would go to the man's room instead. The other girl immediately objected, insisting that she would go. The man smiled with amusement. He had assumed they had abandoned Kyoko. Miku firmly denied it. They had remained silent only because they knew they could not win. But if there was any other way to save Kyoko, they would do absolutely anything. Kyoko had been their friend ever since childhood. More than that, she was their best friend. She had always been there for them. The man laughed loudly, pretending to be moved by such heartfelt friendship. To him, however, friendship meant absolutely nothing in this world. Hearing those words, Kaoru froze. Was that really true? If their bond was truly that strong, if they constantly pushed one another to improve, then perhaps things would have been different. If only he had not rejected that offer back then. Kyoko quietly called Miku's and Keiko's names in concern. The man turned toward the two girls and decided that he would entertain both of them together. Before anything else could happen, Kaoru stepped forward. He calmly asked the man if he would rather fight him instead. Kyoko looked at him in surprise. The man questioned what Kaoru meant. Secretly, he judged Kaoru to be nothing more than another inexperienced newcomer. Seeing the man's hesitation, Kaoru mocked him by asking whether he was actually afraid of someone like him. Then he sweetened the offer. If he won, he would give the man 2 credit coins instead of 1. The special reward immediately caught the man's attention. Believing Kaoru to be an idiot, he eagerly accepted the duel. Kyoko called out to Kaoru. Kaoru told her that he was not doing this to save her. This was simply a decision he had made for the sake of becoming stronger himself. Soon afterward, both men stood facing each other at the dueling grounds. Kaoru calmly analyzed the situation. In his opinion, beginner hunters relied on 3 fundamental attacks. The first was the throw, designed to break through an opponent's guard. The second was the sweep kick, used to restrict movement. The third was the jump attack, the very foundation of fighting games and one of the techniques that trouble beginners the most. The man immediately leaped into the air. Kyoko urgently warned Kaoru that this was the exact same tactic that had defeated her. She urged him to block because the attack was extremely powerful. Kaoru understood that defending alone was the wrong answer. Jump attacks should never simply be blocked. Doing so only left the attacker with the advantage. Instead, they needed to stop the jump before the attack connected. The correct answer was an anti-air attack. Without hesitation, Kaoru rushed forward and struck the airborne man with a powerful punch before he could land. The girls stared in astonishment. Kyoko could hardly believe her eyes. Kaoru had intercepted the jump itself. Smiling confidently, Kaoru mocked his opponent by calling him a grasshopper, a nickname for players who relied endlessly on jumping attacks. He calmly explained that such attacks would never work against him because he knew how to perform anti-air counters. The man angrily shouted that Kaoru should not get carried away over one lucky hit. His confidence disappeared almost immediately. Within moments, Kaoru completely overwhelmed him without giving him any opportunity to fight back. Kyoko watched in amazement. The same opponent she had been unable to touch had been defeated effortlessly. Kaoru picked up the fallen credit coin and calmly declared that he would be taking it. Kyoko hurried over and sincerely thanked him for helping her. Kaoru stopped and looked at her. He asked who had ever said he intended to give the coin to her. Kyoko quietly accepted his answer. Kaoru admitted that he had wanted to leave things at that. However, if she agreed to fulfill one request, he would hand over the coin. Kyoko repeated his words in confusion. Her request? Immediately, she and the others became suspicious, fearing he might be no different from the disgusting man they had just dealt with. Ignoring their doubtful expressions, Kaoru revealed his true request. He wanted Kyoko to become his sparring partner. Surprised, Kyoko asked whether he meant a training partner. Kaoru confirmed it. He explained that this world revolved around knowledge. For a long time, he had believed that becoming stronger alone was the only path to success. Recently, however, the professional fighting game scene had changed. Top players had begun hiring full-time coaches to exchange knowledge and strategies. The results had been outstanding. Watching the girls' unwavering friendship reminded him of a man who had once traveled the world searching for a true rival so that he would never become nothing more than a big fish in a small pond. If they truly wanted to become stronger, they needed comrades they could genuinely trust. Kyoko stood speechless. She could hardly believe that Kaoru considered her someone who could become a trusted companion. Kairu quickly added that she was still far too weak to serve as a proper training partner. Because of that, he intended to train her mercilessly until she reached the required level. He asked whether she could endure such training. Without even a moment's hesitation, Kyoko accepted. She welcomed the challenge with complete determination. Meanwhile, deep inside Bizion Castle, someone asked King Bizion whether there had been a fighting gamer among the latest group of reincarnated people. The king replied that fighting gamers were extraordinary individuals capable of displaying remarkable talent in this world almost immediately. Among the current group, there appeared to be only one person with that kind of potential. His name was Kairu. She then addressed the person before her as father. Alex Chaos questioned whether there was truly only one. He reminded her that he had surrendered the throne solely to satisfy her selfish desires. As the current ruler, she alone bore the responsibility of choosing the nation's representative fighter. The king confidently answered that there was no need for concern. Even if problems arose, they still possessed their strongest warrior, Captain Rakuto. Alex calmly warned that overconfidence could become dangerous. He revealed that the great western nation of Montero had apparently succeeded in summoning a genuine fighting gamer. The king quietly noted that it had been a summoning rather than a reincarnation. Alex confirmed that was correct. He then added that the fighting gamer in question proudly referred to himself as one of the 5 gods of fighting games. At the Iron Gate, the man gasped in disbelief. He couldn't understand what was happening. Kyoko seemed like a completely different person compared to before. Kyoko stood her ground as the man jumped into the air, convinced that this would be enough to defeat her. However, Kyoko had already realized that jump attacks no longer worked against her. The moment he descended to attack, she drove her fist into him, knocking him down in a single blow. Kyoko gasped in excitement after winning, while Miku celebrated her victory. Kairu smiled to himself, satisfied that Kyoko had successfully applied everything she had learned. It had only been a little over a week since her crushing defeat, yet now she had achieved a complete victory. The improvement was remarkable. Kyoko proudly asked Kairu if she had become stronger. Smirking, he pointed out that the answer was obvious from everyone's reaction. The surrounding spectators whispered in amazement, wondering how she had become so powerful and what kind of magic had made such rapid improvement possible. Kairu repeated their comments to Kyoko before reminding her to stop calling him master, explaining that they were simply sparring partners. Despite that, Kyoko only grinned and continued addressing him the same way. From an outsider's perspective, her growth might have seemed like magic. In reality, Kairu had only taught her 2 simple concepts. 3 days earlier, Kairu had gathered the 3 girls and explained that he would only teach them 2 things. Kyoko doubted that learning only 2 techniques would be enough to defeat the man who had beaten her before, but Kairu assured them they could not only win against him, but probably against most fighters in the Iron rank. The first lesson was anti-air, intercepting opponents while they were airborne. Rather than explaining it further, Kairu decided to demonstrate. He instructed Kyoko to jump toward him. As she leaped, she realized she was jumping much higher than expected. Before she could react, Kairu struck her with a punch while she was still in midair. He explained that people in this world could not defend themselves while airborne. Whenever an opponent was in the air, they should immediately think of using an anti-air attack. He then asked what an opponent would likely do after having their jump attack shut down. Keiko correctly answered that they would probably walk forward to get closer. Kairu praised her instincts. Since special moves were uncommon, walking was the primary way to close the distance. Impressed by her answer, he remarked that she had excellent intuition. The second lesson was learning how to stop an opponent advancing on foot. To demonstrate, Kairu instructed Kyoko to walk toward him. She politely asked him to call her simply Kyoko before following his instructions. As she approached, Kairu performed a sweep, knocking her legs out from under her. He explained that a sweep was a powerful attack designed to trip an opponent. In Iron Spirit, there was no need to worry about mechanics such as counter hits or parries. Mika looked confused by those unfamiliar terms. Kairu told her that none of that mattered. The important point was that people in this world also could not defend themselves while walking forward. Both Kyoko and Mika still looked puzzled. Keiko summarized the lesson by realizing that whenever an opponent carelessly jumped or walked straight toward them, it created an opportunity to land an attack. Kairu praised her for understanding immediately, while Miku admired how quickly Keiko had grasped the idea. Afterward, Kairu had them repeatedly practice only anti-air attacks and sweeps. At the same time, he quietly continued refining his own strategy, discovering that this world also had overhead attacks. The results quickly became apparent. Kyoko successfully achieved her revenge match, while Mika earned her first victory by making effective use of her long, flexible legs and kicking techniques. Just as Kairu had predicted, the 2 girls continued winning match after match, and stories of powerful female fighters in the Iron rank spread throughout the arena. Only one remained. Keiko's first match was scheduled for the following day, and Kairu wondered whether such a timid girl could really win. That night, Kairu sat deep in thought, uncertain about what he should do. Mizuna watched him suspiciously, noticing that he had been worrying constantly. She reminded him that he had originally refused to take disciples or make anyone stronger, yet lately all he seemed to think about were those girls. Kairu insisted that it had nothing to do with personal feelings and that everything was simply part of advancing his strategy. Mizuna narrowed her eyes, making sure he had no inappropriate intentions toward high school girls. Kairu immediately denied it, reminding her that he was 43 years old. Satisfied, Mizuna joked that if he was ever interested in anyone, he should at least choose someone over 20. Kairu silently realized that even women in their 20s would still leave a considerable age gap. Setting the joke aside, Mizuna turned serious. Regarding Keiko's upcoming match, she said that if he truly believed she had no chance of winning, then he should stop her. But if there was even the slightest possibility of success, he should trust her and simply watch over her. After all, that was exactly what she herself had once wanted from Kairu. The following day, a massive man stood opposite Keiko, his large frame towering over her much smaller body. Kyoko cheered for her while Miku encouraged her not to lose confidence. Nearby, someone warned the man that losing to such a tiny opponent would be humiliating. He replied that he already knew. The instant the match began, the man charged directly at Keiko. Before he could strike, Keiko swept his legs. As he instinctively jumped into the air, she immediately punched him while he was airborne, sending him crashing to the ground. Watching from the sidelines, Kairu was relieved to see that she was executing both anti-air attacks and sweeps exactly as she had practiced. He hoped she could finish the match before anything changed. The man slowly got back up, refusing to continue falling for the same tactics. This time, he lowered himself onto one knee and crossed both arms in front of his face, taking up a defensive stance. Kairu immediately realized that the opponent had begun developing countermeasures. In fighting games, every strong strategy would eventually have an answer. Since Kairu had taught the girls how to punish aggressive offense, the natural response was to stop attacking recklessly and patiently wait instead. Without knowing whether matches had time limits, a defensive approach became especially effective. The stance the man adopted was called guarding, an ironclad defense capable of blocking almost every grounded attack. Naturally, it also had weaknesses, but Kairu had not yet taught those techniques. At that moment, Keiko suddenly rushed forward and leaped into the air. Kyoko was shocked that this time Keiko's jump attack actually connected. Kairu froze in surprise. Keiko had independently figured out that jump attacks were one of the proper ways to deal with a guarding opponent. Her fist struck against the man's guard. Although it was a close call, Kairu realized she had chosen one of the correct answers. He also noticed that Keiko still held the advantageous position. Quickly, he shouted for her to go all out, reminding her that in this world body size meant nothing. Keiko immediately obeyed. The man's eyes widened in disbelief as the small girl effortlessly lifted his much larger body. Without hesitation, Keiko slammed him violently onto the ground. Everyone watching stood frozen in shock. Even Keiko herself could hardly believe she had actually won. Kairu was equally surprised. She had thrown an opponent who was guarding. She must have remembered watching him perform that technique before and realized it was different from an ordinary throw. Keiko had gone beyond everything he had taught her. He was genuinely impressed. He also realized he owed Mizuna an apology. Kairu praised Keiko for her excellent performance. Quietly, he admitted to himself that perhaps it really was because of his age. It seemed he genuinely enjoyed watching young people grow and improve. Keiko smiled brightly and shyly asked him to call her Keiko-chan. Inside Bizion Castle, the king learned that Kairu and his small group were already close to reaching bronze rank. The news amused him, but he found the harmony within the group boring. If they continued becoming a close-knit, friendly team, it would no longer be entertaining. Captain Rakuto assured him that the next representative preliminaries would begin soon. When the king asked what he intended to do, Rakuto revealed that he already had a plan. At the upcoming gathering, he intended to destroy the bond between master and disciple. In Kairu's thoughts, he realized that he genuinely enjoyed watching young people grow. He gathered the girls and declared that they would all become stronger together for the sake of surviving in this other world. The girls enthusiastically agreed. From a distance, however, Mizuna silently watched them with dark, unreadable eyes. The following day, Kairu announced that their real training would finally begin. Before starting, he made one serious request. He asked all of them to swear that they would never reveal what he was about to teach anyone else. Simply knowing this knowledge could make someone far stronger. If it spread beyond their group, it could create monsters that ordinary people would never be able to defeat. The girls were shocked by the seriousness of his warning, but they promised to keep it secret. Satisfied, Kairu introduced the day's topic: special moves. Keiko wondered if special moves were guaranteed killing techniques. Kairu explained that they were not. Instead, he pointed to the shockwave attack they had previously witnessed Captain Rakuto use as an example of a special move. Kyoko was amazed that such techniques might also be possible for them. Kaoru confirmed that they could. Miku became especially excited, urging him to teach them immediately. Kaoru found it surprising that Miku was the one reacting so enthusiastically. He told everyone to calm down first because, before teaching them, he needed to learn something about each of them. He asked about their hobbies. The girls were puzzled by the question. Keiko felt embarrassed to answer. Kyoko wondered what it had to do with fighting, and Miku jokingly compared the conversation to a social mixer. Kaoru explained that there was a good reason. From everything he had observed, special moves in this world reflected whatever a person was most deeply attached to. Understanding that, Kyoko immediately realized her answer would be karate. Mika guessed hers would be retro games because of the large collection her father owned. Kyoko looked at her in surprise. When Kaoru asked Keiko, she shyly admitted that she loved watching professional wrestling. Hearing that, Kaoru finally became convinced. Special moves truly reflected a person's interests and passions. With that in mind, he began teaching them how to move their bodies in ways that might activate those abilities. Among the countless possible motions, there were surely one or two that each of them would be capable of using. Their search for special moves began. They repeatedly practiced crouching and standing, backdashing, and endlessly throwing punches and kicks in different combinations. In the end, the first person to discover a special move was once again someone Kaoru had not expected. Miku excitedly announced that she had done it. Kaoru immediately told her to demonstrate it on him. Although Miku worried that it might actually hit him, Kaoru assured her not to hold back. The moment she unleashed her technique, a sharp energy slash flew through the air toward Kaoru. He was stunned. It was a projectile attack. That meant Miku belonged to the projectile type, just like Captain Rikudo. Miku eagerly waited for his reaction. Kyoko was amazed, wondering how Miku had managed such an attack, while Keiko became curious about the name of the technique. Miku explained that special moves naturally needed names. Kaoru quietly accepted that reasoning. Deciding that they had accomplished enough for the day, he dismissed training and instructed everyone to continue practicing on their own. That night, Kaoru sat alone in his room, writing inside his new strategy notebook. While reflecting on the day, he suddenly realized something important. To a modern fighting game player, becoming so excited over discovering a single special move might seem childish. Yet seeing the girls' genuine happiness reminded him of the arcades from his own era. Back then, fighting games revealed very little to players. There were only simple tutorials and tiny move lists, leaving everything else to be discovered through trial and error. Players spent the few coins they had chasing that mystery. Because of that uncertainty, every newly discovered move, every victory, and every small improvement felt incredibly rewarding. Conquering this strange fighting game world felt exactly like stepping back into those old arcades. It was like learning a mysterious new fighting game for the very first time. Surrounded by spectators, uncertain whether the game would ultimately be good or terrible, he continued advancing one step at a time, relying on his experience while savoring the excitement of uncovering its secrets. Realizing this rekindled his determination. His desire to beat this game had grown even stronger. He also realized that this renewed passion existed because of those three girls. He was truly glad they were training together. Those words reached Nizuna. Her expression froze, and she quietly clenched her teeth. The next day, Kaoru announced that they would continue training exactly as they had the previous day. The three girls stared at him in disbelief. Confused, Kaoru asked why they were looking at him that way, and whether something had happened. Miku replied that they should be asking him that question instead. Even more puzzled, Kaoru asked what she meant. Suddenly, Kyoko shouted for him to look behind him. Turning around, Kaoru found Nizuna standing there dressed in a fighter's outfit. Surprised, he reminded her that she was supposed to be resting. Nizuna explained that since Kaoru still refused to teach her how to fight, she had decided to join the training herself. She stepped in front of the three girls and firmly declared that, as an adult woman, she had come to watch over them to make sure no inappropriate misunderstandings occurred. Kyoko reacted angrily to the implication. Miku also dismissed the idea, saying that nothing like that would happen with an old man like Kaoru. Nizuna looked directly at them and questioned whether Kaoru had truly never made their hearts skip even once. The girls immediately denied it. Before the conversation could continue, another voice interrupted them. The newcomer remarked that the rumors were apparently true and that Kaoru certainly seemed popular with women. Everyone turned toward the speaker. It was Captain Rikudo. Kaoru wondered why someone of the captain's rank had come all the way to the lower ranks. He guessed it might be to announce their promotion after their long winning streak. Rikudo admitted that such news would have been nice. Unfortunately, he had come for another reason. He informed them that every one of them would participate in the upcoming national representative selection trials. The girls were confused by the announcement. Captain Rikudo explained that the World Martial Tournament would soon take place, and every nation needed to choose its representative. He also mentioned that whoever ultimately became the representative would receive any wish they desired as a reward from the king. Upon hearing that, Kyoko immediately thought that Kairu could simply enter the tournament, win, and have his wish granted. However, Captain Rakuto revealed the unfortunate details. Participation was mandatory for all of them, and anyone who lost would receive severe punishment. There was one additional problem. Every participant had to compete in teams of 2. That meant one member of their group would inevitably be left without a partner. Kairu asked about the 2-person teams, pointing out that they had already partnered up during the previous event. He wondered if they would simply be fighting alongside the same partners again. Captain Rakuto shook his head. This time, the competition would be a genuine 2 versus 2 team battle. He explained that he himself had proposed the format to the king, calling it Wazita. Curious, Kyoko asked what that meant. Rakuto explained that in a Wazita match, each team would split into a vanguard and a captain, with each member fighting a separate one-on-one match. The first team to earn 2 victories would win. Kyoko then asked what would happen if each team won 1 match and lost 1. Rakuto explained that, in that case, the 2 victorious fighters would face each other in a deciding match to determine the overall winner. Keiko immediately realized the problem. She pointed out that if one fighter on a team was overwhelmingly stronger than everyone else, that single person could potentially win both of the team's victories. In their own group, that meant whoever partnered with Kairu would have the greatest chance of advancing. Rakuto calmly agreed. He remarked that such an outcome would indeed be unfortunate. Walking closer to Kairu, he quietly warned him that he should carefully consider whom he chose as his partner. He asked who Kairu intended to save and who he intended to abandon. Having delivered his message, Rakuto apologized for interrupting their training and left. Silence immediately fell over the group. Kyoko was the first to speak, asking Kairu whom he planned to partner with. Kairu replied that neither his own partner nor the others' pairings would be decided until just before the tournament began. Until then, everyone should focus only on becoming as strong as possible. Mika hesitantly asked whether they could really trust him. Kyoko immediately tried to stop her. Miku explained that she simply meant there could ultimately be only one winner. Since they would eventually become one another's opponents, she wondered why Kairu would continue training them at all. Kairu answered coldly that if that was truly how she felt, she was free to leave and never return. He had no interest in teaching someone who did not want to learn. Miku quietly fell silent. Kairu then added that, despite everything, the following day he would teach them something that would become absolutely essential for winning from that point onward. After saying that, he walked away. Later that night, the 3 girls relaxed together in the bathhouse. Miku asked what they should do. Kyoko asked what she meant. Miku explained that she was still thinking about what had happened earlier and wondered whether they could truly trust Kairu. Kyoko answered that whether she trusted him or not did not change the facts. They had unquestionably become stronger because of him. At this stage, doubting him made no sense. Kyoko then asked Keiko what she thought. Keiko replied without hesitation that she believed their master would guide them until the very end. Miku quietly acknowledged their opinions. She understood that both of them completely trusted him. Kyoko asked whether Miku felt differently. Miku admitted that she did not believe Kairu was a bad person. Still, he reminded her of her own father. He seemed like the kind of person who would never hold back in a fight and would do absolutely anything necessary to win. She sensed that Nazuna possessed that same determination. Nazuna also seemed willing to do anything if it meant surviving. Meanwhile, in Kairu's room, he confronted Nazuna and asked what she was trying to do. Nazuna acted as though the answer should have been obvious. Still confused, Kairu admitted that he genuinely did not understand. Nazuna moved closer and quietly reminded him of the promise he had made. This time, he had sworn that he would not abandon her. Kairu assured her that he had not forgotten. Nazuna answered that promises alone were no longer enough. She believed that if they formed a deeper bond, he would never be able to forget her. Kairu gently placed a hand on her shoulder and pushed her back. He told her not to force herself into something she did not truly want. Nazuna insisted that she was not forcing herself. Kairu quietly called it a lie. He could see that she was trembling. Nazuna admitted that she could not help it. She asked whether he had any idea how everyone had looked at her before he rescued her. Kairu fell silent. After a long pause, he apologized as he embraced her. He asked her to believe him. This time, he would not fail. The following day, Kairu resumed training as though nothing had happened. Even so, everyone could feel the tension. Each of the girls quietly wondered whom their master would eventually choose. Kyoko noticed that Kairu already seemed to have reached some sort of decision. Day after day, he continued teaching them relentlessly, training them even harder than before. However, there was one exception. Despite repeatedly mentioning it, he never revealed the one lesson that he claimed they would absolutely need in order to win. Even when training finally ended, he still kept it secret. At last, just before the representative selection trials began, Kairu gathered everyone together. He announced that he would finally reveal the team pairings. He explained that the teams had been decided according to everyone's abilities and that he would not accept any objections. The first team would be Kyoko and Keiko. Keiko happily told Kyoko that they would do their best together. Kyoko agreed. Inside, however, she quietly clenched her fists. She told herself not to lose hope. After all, the person left without a partner would be in the worst position. Kaoru then announced the next name. Nazuna. Kyoko's expression darkened. She assumed she already understood everything. Naturally, Kaoru would choose Nazuna as his own partner. That meant the one left out would be. Before she could finish the thought, Kaoru completed the announcement. Nazuna would instead be partnered with Miku. Mika stared in shock. If that was true, then the only person left without a partner would be Kaoru himself. Kyoko could hardly believe it. She wondered whether Kaoru had intended from the beginning to leave himself out. Kaoru immediately denied that assumption. Of course he would also participate. He simply had a different partner. He pointed toward a huge man standing nearby. Kyoko asked who he was. The surrounding fighters stared in amazement at the man's enormous physique, unable to believe someone like him still belonged to the lower ranks. Kaoru introduced him as Bigo, the current strongest fighter in gold rank. Kyoko froze. Her master had teamed up with the strongest gold rank fighter. It almost felt as though victory had already been decided. Finally, Kaoru revealed the lesson he had been withholding all this time. Surprised, Kyoko realized he had waited until now to tell them. Kaoru instructed everyone to listen carefully. To win in this other world, they had to thoroughly exploit whatever their opponents hated the most. Kaoru explained that, in order to win in this world, they had to exploit their opponent's weaknesses. Suddenly, Mika grabbed him by the front of his shirt, unable to hide her anger. She realized that, by his own logic, he had done exactly the same thing to them, so that he could secure his own victory. She demanded to know whether everything he had taught them had been nothing more than fake strategies. Kaoru calmly answered that they should discover the truth for themselves. As he had promised, he had trained them until that day. From that moment onward, however, they were no longer teacher and students. They were enemies fighting for their own survival. Before leaving, he gave them one final piece of advice. If there was something they wanted to know, they would have to investigate it themselves instead of waiting for someone else to hand them the answer. Mika gritted her teeth and silently cursed him. Keiko anxiously asked Kyoko what they should do now. Kyoko answered that they should do exactly what Kaoru had told them. The only way to know whether they had truly become stronger was to prove it themselves. Later, at the Silver Gate, fighters were already battling fiercely. One competitor launched a powerful punch, while another slammed his opponent into the ground. Looking around, Kyoko frowned. Even though this was supposed to be silver rank, she felt that none of the fighters looked particularly impressive. One of the men angrily demanded to know who she was. Kyoko confidently replied that they were simply new challengers who had come to defeat every one of them. The man laughed at the idea. They were only iron rank fighters. Did they honestly believe they could defeat silver rank opponents? Keiko quietly admitted that he had a point. Perhaps silver rank was too high a place for them to test their strength. Kyoko immediately disagreed. The upcoming tournament would mostly be filled with gold rank fighters. If they could not even overcome silver rank opponents, then they had no chance of succeeding later. She turned to Keiko with determination. It was time to demonstrate the results of all their training. At the tournament venue, the king addressed the gathered warriors from countless different worlds. The competition would use the Wazita format, with every participant fighting in teams of two. The winning team would earn the right to challenge the reigning champions, Captain Rakuto's team, for the honor of representing the kingdom. The king declared that Captain Rakuto was the strongest fighter she had ever acknowledged. Although defeating him seemed almost impossible, she promised that anyone who managed to become the representative would receive any wish they desired. Among the audience, nobles quietly discussed the upcoming matches. Some confidently predicted that Captain Rakuto would once again become champion. Others disagreed. One elderly spectator placed his bet on the team of Garai and Ryu. His companion nodded in understanding. The pair consisted of last tournament's runner-up together with the strongest female fighter. Other than Rakuto's team, they were considered the favorites to win. The king then announced the opening match. It would be Garai and Ryu against the team of Bigo and Kaoru. The elderly spectator immediately became excited. The audience erupted in surprise. Many recognized Bigo immediately. He had once fought Captain Rakuto on equal footing, so seeing him compete again generated tremendous excitement. Some spectators even regretted that such an anticipated match would happen so early in the tournament. Then attention shifted toward Bigo's partner. Confusion quickly spread. Kaoru looked completely ordinary. He was neither young nor physically imposing. Worse still, he was officially only an iron rank fighter. Many in the crowd openly mocked him. Some claimed he had no business standing on such a stage. Others shouted for him to leave, dismissing him as nothing more than worthless trash. Meanwhile, Kaoru quietly reminded Bigo of their plan. Bigo simply answered that he already understood. Watching from the stands, one spectator assumed Kaoru intended to let Bigo carry the entire tournament by himself. The host called for the vanguards to step forward. More criticism echoed throughout the arena. Some accused Kairu of planning to let Bigo win every fight. Others called him a coward. Some even mocked him for trying to ride the strongest fighter's coattails. The host prepared to begin the Vanguard match. Before he could officially start the battle, however, Bigo suddenly interrupted. He announced that he was withdrawing from the Vanguard match. Without hesitation, Kairu stepped forward. Looking across the arena, he declared that everyone had been running their mouths despite knowing absolutely nothing. Then, wearing a confident smirk, he made a bold proclamation. He would be the one to win the tournament all by himself. The crowd erupted after hearing Kairu's bold declaration. Ignoring the jeers, Kairu calmly told everyone that they had no idea what they were talking about. He alone would fight through the entire trial and win it. The audience immediately burst into an uproar. Some wondered whether he really intended to fight by himself. Others mocked him, telling the Iron Rank fighter not to get carried away. Several spectators shouted that Bigo should be the one fighting instead. Kairu paid no attention to any of it. This had always been the agreement between him and Bigo. Earlier, Kairu had approached Bigo with a proposal. He asked Bigo to become his partner for the selection trial. Kairu had heard that Bigo was the only capable fighter who had not yet joined a team. Bigo rejected the offer without hesitation. Kairu quickly stopped him, saying that if Bigo doubted his abilities, he could prove himself immediately. Bigo explained that Kairu's strength was not the issue. He simply had no intention of entering the tournament. Curious, Kairu asked why. Bigo answered that there was no point. Even if he participated, nobody could defeat Captain Rakuto. Kairu asked whether Rakuto was really that powerful. Bigo confirmed that he was. According to him, Captain Rakuto had never once been defeated. Kairu acknowledged the information, remembering that Bigo himself had fought Rakuto before. He quietly concluded that Rakuto would never lose to an opponent he had already faced once. Bigo explained that he had decided never to fight again unless there was a meaningful reason. The only reason he would ever fight now was to protect the children under his care. Kairu asked whether those children had also been reincarnated into this world. Bigo answered yes. They were far too young to survive as fighters, and without someone protecting them, they would not last long. Kairu understood. If those children did not exist, would Bigo participate in the tournament? Bigo answered no. Even then, he believed victory against Rakuto was impossible, making the entire tournament meaningless. Kairu interrupted him. That would not be a problem. Bigo would not have to fight at all. He could simply stand by and watch. Kairu had already come up with a strategy capable of defeating Rakuto. Back in the present, Bigo silently watched from the sidelines. He trusted Kairu's skill. However, Rakuto was only one obstacle. Kairu still had to defeat every other opponent by himself before even reaching him. Could he truly accomplish such an impossible task? Watching from above, the vice-captain asked Rakuto whether Kairu was the fighter who had caught his interest. Rakuto confirmed it. At first glance, Kairu certainly did not appear strong. The vice-captain jokingly remarked that he also seemed just as clumsy with women as Rakuto himself. Rakuto simply told her to keep watching. She would soon understand. The host announced the opening match. Kairu against Garai. The battle began immediately. Without hesitation, Garai attacked. Activating her special move, her arms extended unnaturally far and shot toward Kairu like whips. The audience erupted in cheers. Everyone recognized Garai's signature technique. Kairu stepped backward. He was too late. Her punches struck him squarely in the chest. The vice-captain quietly noted how easily he had been hit. Rakuto remained silent. He simply continued watching. Garai confidently declared that she had no intention of mocking someone from Iron Rank. There was simply no possibility that someone at his level could defeat a gold rank fighter. Kairu calmly answered that they would never know without trying. He suddenly jumped. Garai immediately responded. Her legs stretched outward just like her arms, striking him while he was still airborne. She explained that before arriving in this world, she had worked in a circus. Every day, she trained as a contortionist, dedicating herself completely to achieving the perfect body. After being reincarnated, that lifelong pursuit had finally evolved into the ultimate body. Since Kairu could never even touch her, defeat was inevitable. Watching carefully, Kairu analyzed the situation. Fighting games had always included zoning characters like Garai. Their specialty was preventing opponents from getting close by controlling space with extremely long-reaching attacks. Garai fit that archetype perfectly. The vice-captain commented that Garai possessed the longest reach in the entire kingdom. Unless Kairu possessed a method of instantly closing the distance, or perhaps projectile attacks like Rakuto, she could not imagine any way for him to overcome Garai's advantage. She wondered what kind of fighter Kairu truly was. Despite all his confident words, he had spent the entire match retreating. Little by little, Garai continued pushing him backward. Some spectators grew impatient. One demanded that the referee end the match. Another complained that watching a battle where almost nobody moved was unbearably dull. The vice-captain agreed. It seemed Kairu simply had no answer for Garai's incredible reach. Just as she was about to dismiss the match entirely, Rikudo quietly spoke. He found it interesting. Confused, the vice captain looked toward him. Rikudo told her to keep watching. Something strange was about to happen. Almost immediately afterward, Garai suddenly collapsed onto the ground. The vice captain stared in disbelief. The audience was equally stunned. Nobody understood what had happened. One spectator pointed out that Garai had been dominating the match from long range before suddenly falling. Another guessed that perhaps she had simply lost her balance. Garai quickly stood back up. She launched another attack with her extending arms. Once again, she suddenly collapsed. The confusion only deepened. Everyone now realized it had not been an accident. Garai had actually taken damage. But from what? Kyra had never even gotten close to her. Even the vice captain could not understand. She turned to Rikudo and asked whether he knew what Kairu had done. Rikudo answered with a single word. Kairu had kicked. The vice captain was completely puzzled. How could a kick possibly reach from that distance? Rikudo calmly explained. Long-range attacks were indeed a tremendous advantage. However, they also carried a significant weakness. Whenever such attacks missed, they left enormous openings. The vice captain answered that this much was obvious. Rikudo agreed. But that was not the weakness he meant. She had been thinking only about the recovery after the attack. Rikudo explained that the real vulnerability lay elsewhere. When Garai extended her arms to attack, those arms themselves became exposed. Just like Kairu's own body, her stretched limbs could also be struck. That was exactly why Kairu had chosen to kick. Throughout the match, he had intentionally appeared to be fighting defensively. In reality, he had been carefully measuring the precise distance where Garai's attacks would barely miss him. Once he found that perfect spacing, he timed his own attack to connect with her extended limbs the instant they entered range. That technique had a name: whiff punish. The vice captain was stunned. She questioned whether it was even possible to read an opponent's movements with such unbelievable precision. Rikudo smiled faintly. The fact that Kairu could perform something like that proved only one thing. Kairu was the real deal. He was a genuine fighting game player. The vice captain stared at Rikudo in shock. A true fighting game player? Rikudo explained that the term referred to people who had devoted their entire lives to mastering certain fighting games before arriving in this world. Through years of obsession, they had gained extraordinary knowledge and skills. The vice captain acknowledged that, but pointed out that Kairu had not actually won yet. Rikudo calmly corrected her. Kairu had already won. He explained that in a tournament where every battle was against a new opponent, one ability surpassed all others in importance: the ability to quickly uncover an opponent's habits. Kairu had already discovered one of Garai's. Every time Garai was knocked down, she immediately abandoned the offensive and focused entirely on creating distance. A fighter's habits always revealed their weaknesses. In Garai's case, her greatest weakness at close range was being thrown. Rikudo continued. Because Garai relied on powerful attacks that required heavy commitment. Once an opponent entered throwing range, she had very few ways to regain distance. If she allowed someone to get close even once, the outcome was inevitable. The referee announced the end of the match. The winner was fighter Kairu. The audience erupted into cheers. The vice captain admitted that she understood now. Whiff punish made Kairu a terrible matchup for a long-range specialist like Garai. However, his next opponent would be Ryu, a close-range powerhouse. Surely that would be a much more even fight. Rikudo simply replied that he wondered about that. Then he suddenly asked the vice captain whether she knew who had created the kingdom's fighter ranking system. She answered that she did. After becoming champion, Captain Rikudo had advised King Bizion and introduced numerous reforms, including the ranking system. Rikudo nodded before asking another question. Did she know what gold rank actually represented? She assumed it was simply the rank reserved for the strongest fighters. Rikudo shook his head. Gold rank merely represented the highest level that existed within the kingdom of Bizion. Originally, he had intended to create additional ranks above it, such as platinum and diamond. However, there had never been anyone in the kingdom worthy of those titles. The vice captain slowly realized what he was implying. Did that mean Kairu belonged to one of those higher ranks? Was he platinum or diamond? Rikudo answered neither. Based on his own judgment, someone capable of whiff punishing while accurately identifying an opponent's habits belonged to a level beyond all of those. Master rank. The rank above every other. The vice captain thought about Ryu. If Ryu was only gold rank, Rikudo finished the thought for her. Even if Kairu's worst matchup happened to be close-range combat, the gap in their fundamentals was simply too enormous. Ryu stood no chance. Soon afterward, the referee announced another victory. The winner was once again fighter Kairu. As a result, the team of Bigo and Kairu advanced. The audience was stunned. An officially iron rank fighter had defeated two gold rank opponents. The vice captain quickly turned back to Rikudo. If everything he said was true, did anyone in the kingdom of Bizion even possess the ability to defeat Kairu? Rikudo answered that there was one. Himself. He also belonged to master rank. Still, he explained that even when there was an overwhelming difference in skill, a match could remain interesting if certain restrictions were introduced. Anything capable of disrupting a fighter's mental state could completely change the outcome. Just as the referee prepared to announce the next match, Rikudo interrupted. Before the tournament continued, the defeated team would first receive their punishment. He presented Garai and Ryu with two choices. The first option was retirement. They would remain imprisoned until the tournament ended before being sold to nobles as slaves. The second option allowed them to continue fighting. However, as a permanent reminder of their defeat, a mark would be burned into their flesh. Rikudo ordered them to choose. After a brief silence, Garai answered. Although they had suffered a complete defeat, she felt no shame. Kairu's strength was genuine. Their battle against him and the loss they experienced had become an invaluable lesson they would never forget. Because of that, she accepted the mark without regret. To her, it would simply become another symbol of a proud battle. Rikudo accepted her decision. He ordered the soldiers to carry out the punishment. Red-hot metal was pressed against Garai's and Raya's skin. Both cried out in agony. When the branding iron was removed, a scorched mark remained burned into their flesh. Rikudo watched calmly before ordering the tournament to proceed. The vice-captain wondered whether such punishments would truly be enough to shake Kairu. Even after witnessing everything, Kairu had not moved a single step. Rikudo told her not to be impatient. Psychological pressure took time to produce results. Despite his expectations, Kairu continued winning. Throughout the tournament, Bigo never once entered a fight. Kairu fought every battle alone. The only acknowledgement he gave the defeated was a brief glance as they received their punishments. Watching him, the vice-captain realized that his victories were not due solely to his strength. She could see it clearly in his eyes. His unwavering determination and conviction never faltered. No matter how much they tried to intimidate him, their petty harassment failed to affect him in the slightest. Unexpectedly, she found that confidence strangely attractive. Then Rikudo quietly spoke. It was time. The vice-captain asked what he meant. Rikudo answered that the moment had finally arrived when Kairu's composure would begin to crack. She was confused. Kairu had already reached the verge of the finals. At this point, what could possibly? Her thoughts stopped as the referee announced the semi-final match. The team of Bigo and Kairu would face. The vice-captain's eyes widened the instant she recognized the challengers. At the same moment, Rikudo's expression turned completely serious. The referee declared the opposing team. Kyoko and Keiko. Watching from his throne, the king slowly smirked. Now, this was a match worth paying close attention to.